Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest ValuesJam guest session. And Sangeeta, brilliant to have you here. So to kick off, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about the great work that you do?
Hi, Alan. I'm really excited about doing this with you. So I'm Sangeeta Waldron, and I'm the owner and founder of Serendipity PR and Media. And I'm also the author of Corporate Social Responsibility is Not Public Relations. And these days, I would say I'm focused on making sure that brands are authentic and they're not greenwashing. That's my work in a nutshell.
Brilliant, thank you. And so important, right? Because on a podcast, not that recently, actually, it was some time ago now, but I made the comment that, or it was a question, would marketers rather be masters of authenticity or masters of persuasion? And in marketing in the past, they've kind of been that persuasion thing. And on the dark side, that leads you into greenwashing and other things like that, right?
Absolutely. And I think maybe pre-pandemic, if we go, back to 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago, I would say there was this kind of this dark art, the sort of the persuasion, the spin of PR was probably more. But after the pandemic and this new world we're living in, and also during the course of the pandemic, there has been this real consciousness, this real awakening of people within the media industry, from publicists to marketeers to advertisers, all thinking about how to be authentic with brands and be the solution rather than just putting out another product or greenwashing.
And it's the only way, really, because these days the truth gets out eventually. Sometimes it gets out super quick compared to what it used to. And so if you're going to get caught out, or if there's a risk, it's just not worth it. You might as well just be true to yourselves.
Well, we're living in this social media age. Everything is instant. It always reminds me of that song by Martha and the Vandellas. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. And that's exactly it. If you think you're going to be able to sweep it under the carpet, well, that carpet's invisible.
Yeah, that's a great way to. I love that phrase. If you're going to sweep it under the carpet, remember that the carpet's invisible. Yeah. So let's choose a ValuesJam card. So I've got the deck here, and I'm just going to tip out some of the cards, and then how many times would you like me to cut this deck that I've got here?
3.
3. Okay, so I've got 3 piles in front of me. So would you like pile 1, 2, or 3?
3, please.
And we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 cards. So a number between 1 and 10.
7.
7, 2. Okay, so this is it. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited. Openness.
Openness. So no closed answers, Sangeeta.
Yep. Okay. God.
So first question is this. What does openness mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Oh, can I start with it feels and sounds like first?
Yeah, sure.
Fun, airiness, integrity. It feels good. There's no weight. And I would say I am an open book. I try and be as open and transparent, not just in my business life, but my work life. And I think those two have blended anyway. So your work and your business life have become almost one now because we're working from home. So, and what you see is what you get.
Yeah, okay. And this is a bit weird because, before we chose the card, we were talking about authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And that is, for me, in effect, what openness is. And it's actually, like we were saying at the beginning, it's easier to be open when you're being authentic because there's nothing there that you're kind of trying to cover up.
Yeah.
And you've you know what you said about how our personal lives and our business lives are one now. I remember doing some work for a logistics company, and they were talking about with the leadership team, and they were talking about how they had it was like yeah, I think it was a purpose statement, they called it. And they said, and we've got one for our customers and we've got one for our employees. And this is quite a few years ago. And I said, well, why haven't you got just one?
Yeah.
Rather than have to be like this with one group and this with another group. And that's what they eventually did. But I think it's truer today that you've got to be a bit like a Blackpool stick of rock, you know, the same all the way through,
Yeah.
irrespective of which stakeholder group you're dealing with. And you said it felt good, openness. And I can see, when I think of an image, you use the term open book, and I see an open book. That's the image that comes to mind. It feels natural to me, actually, and relaxed. You know, you don't have to try because it's just what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you can't be anything else but yourself.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to try and be something you're not.
Yeah.
Because then you have to, it can become expensive, you know, trying to pretend you're something that you're not, or your background's different, or your home life is different. I always remember somebody telling me recently, just after the pandemic, that when they started their company, must have been, I think, 2018, 2016, around 2016 mark, they pretended they had a big working office with lots of people. And when one of the clients said, oh, we'll come round to your office and see the team, he had to admit that he just kind of created that facade so he could win business.
Yeah.
But in fact, it was just a one-man band. Didn't have an office. And he said, she, you know, once he explained it to this business associate, they were fine. They actually appreciated the honesty. And so he said that was his that was his sort of turning point. And he's always very, very open and transparent about how he operates. And I think one of the things the pandemic has given us while we've been living these online business lives is that it's made us more human. And you know, you've got things going on around you, you've got home going on around you, you've got children around you, so I think that just makes it easier to navigate.
And during ValuesJam conversations, this happens. I don't know if it'll happen to you during this conversation, but it's just happened to me. So what happens frequently, people tell us something like this, oh, this has just crossed my mind and that hasn't really occurred to me for like many years or longer than that. And you've just done it to me because you're talking about that guy pretending that he had a big business. When I did my, what was I? I was a graduate trainee. So this is, oh my goodness, it's 40 years ago, right? So I was doing my training in the hospitality sector in the reception area. And we had an overbooking situation. So this guest arrived, American, and the senior receptionist said to me, look, this is the way that we handle this. So I'm like, okay, you know, learn. And the receptionist said, I'm really sorry, Mr. whatever his name was. We've had a flood in your room, and it means that we're not able to accommodate you tonight. And so what we're going to do is help you find a room in another hotel, if that's all right. And I was confused, you know, I was like, what? Where did that come from? And then guess what? The American guest said, can we go and take a look? And so in the end, the guy admitted that there wasn't a flood at all, but that was the story that he decided to use to, you know, explain to the guest. Guest wasn't very happy at all. But isn't that weird? So 40 years ago, you just brought that memory back for me when we're talking about openness. So let's go to the other side of the openness coin.
Oh
Which
no, that's another
yeah.
side. Yeah.
So where have you noticed a lack of openness?
I think maybe with myself sometimes,
Okay,
rather
how?
than others. Openness, maybe a kind of denial about how I'm feeling about things. Um, yeah, an example would be, and I think maybe we all do this. Sometimes we're in denial about how we're actually coping with life or how we're feeling about things. And in 2020, I was writing my corporate social responsibilities, not public relations. And that would have been a very easy book for me to write. I know it like the back of my hand. But I couldn't write. I felt like I was treading through treacle. My brain just was not, I couldn't think of the words to write. It was just such a block. And there's somebody who I know, and we were exchanging messages on LinkedIn. She's a fellow, she also works in PR, and she said, "Oh, how's the book coming along?" And I said, "I'm finding it really difficult." And I had just also told her I just lost my mum. And she said, "You're dealing with grief."
Okay.
And that was just like, it's such a natural thing, but because I think sometimes we don't allow ourselves to be in touch with how we're feeling, that we park everything. And then it was just like a penny dropping. And when I just had that, she said that to me, it was like a penny, it was like an epiphany. And then after that, I was able to write. It was so weird. And I think that's sometimes, people who, my husband will say to me, "What's on your mind?" I know, I'm fine. But when something is on my mind, but I'm not even acknowledging it to myself. So that, I think, is where I'm sometimes not open, because maybe it's too much to deal with, or I'm not ready to deal with it.
And the other perspective that listening to you describe that is that you're not even aware. So, it's not you not wanting to be open. It wasn't you not wanting to write, but something was in the way and you weren't actually aware what it was that was.
Yeah, it was such a strange thing. But I've noticed sometimes when I'm trying to push things, I'm not in tune with myself. So I'm not open with myself. I'm not, I know this sounds a bit of a hippie term, but I'm not in my own flow.
Yeah. And we had this morning, I'm involved with a global poetry showcase, and we had a meetup every month, and the call this morning. And there was one guy from India, actually, and he was explaining that he was now writing poetry in his mother tongue after he had been trying for a number of years to write in English. And he was saying now he finds it so much easier because it's much more natural. But he had a question for, there was one of the review panelists on the call as well. And his question was, how do I write about happy stuff? And he said, because all of my poetry seems to be a bit miserable. And Paul, the review panelist, said, just don't force yourself. You cannot sit down at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and say, I'm going to write happy. It doesn't work like that with poetry. No. And what he suggested actually was, if you, for instance, think about a time or a place when you've been happy, just write down some of those words that come to you and keep them and revisit them from time to time. And you might find that in a couple of days or a week or a month, something happens and you start to build on that, and maybe a poem will come, maybe it won't. But you can't, and what Paul was saying was you just can't force it. It has to, you can maybe create a conducive environment, but you can't actually make it happen. And I wonder how many people operate like that, actually, because that's counterintuitive to a world in which we plan everything, have goals and targets and performance, but I wonder whether it's the best way, really.
Yeah, sometimes I think we need to relax more within ourselves.
Yeah.
That allows us to be ourselves more. I have found.
And it's also that way, if you were to do that. So I tend to use a phrase about focusing on intention rather than goals, which are a bit more specific. And I find that if I maintain the intention, then the goals on the way to that intention might shift. They might change over time, and according to circumstance, because it's like, do you really think when you set a goal that you have perfect knowledge about how things are going to unfold? You don't.
No, and you've just reminded me of a quote I just read over the weekend
Okay.
by Gandhi. And I've never heard, I've not, I mean, when you think of Gandhi, the famous one is be the change you want to see in the world. That's the one I kind of only kind of know. But I've discovered he said, and I thought this is so true, when if you find your purpose, everything else will come. And that is, and that's with anything in life, if you just find your purpose, you will be supported in that intent, that mission, whatever it is. And I don't know, it's so simple, but that really has struck a chord with me. And this whole weekend I've been thinking about that. And you've just reminded me, I wanted to explore that quote more and in what context Gandhi said that. But because I think that's quite a, when you these days you hear of Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle all talking about flow, being in the flow, being in that consciousness. That is just being true. If you're just true to your purpose, everything else will come. And that sounds so simple. It's also very powerful.
Yeah, and I have to confess that I struggle in this space because I'm not so sure that there is a way, a single way. And so, for instance, to say, if you know your purpose, everything will follow is all well and good. But if that means that you don't plan anything at all, then it's like, is that really going to be the most effective way if you're just kind of waiting for
Oh, no,
things?
I don't think you can wait for anything. You have to have the action.
Yeah.
And I mean, even when they say, you go within and you meditate, you're meditating for the way forward so that you know which road to act on or what feels right for your instinct or your intuition or your gut, whatever you want to call it. So nothing can happen without the action.
Mm-hmm.
Action is so important. But I think sometimes we get so hung up on how's it going to happen, how we're going to do it. Sometimes it's just letting go a little bit of that fear.
Yeah.
So you can act. Otherwise you can riddle yourself with fear that you don't even make the first step.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that as well is recognizing, let's call them goals, for what they are. And that is just a means to the end, right? They're not sacred in themselves. And yet we seem to become obsessed with them, forgetting why we put them in place in the first place. And therefore it means that if circumstances dictate that perhaps you should change or tweak or even swap out your goals, then be able to do that. They're not the most important thing necessarily.
No, and I think everything evolves.
Yeah.
Brands evolve. You mentioned the stick of rock with the that theme running from, what do you call it, the stamp in the middle. Yeah, the Blackpool rock with the stamp in the middle, and you can eat your way all to the end and it'll still have the same mission or whatever strap line in there. But that, brands too can evolve. The strap line can evolve their mission, their purpose, because everything is changing. And we know that in the last 3 years, we've seen so much change. And those organizations that are able to pivot authentically have been able to thrive. So yes, we all evolving. Your employees will be evolving. The, you know, an organization might grow or it might retract a little bit. So yes, of course. And then therefore you might be doing things on a smaller scale rather than on a much bigger scale, or you might think of being less global, more local. But that's all fine. That doesn't mean you're failing or it's completely different. That's life as well.
Yeah. And I think what you're touching on here is more of a focus on what is, rather than this kind of focus on whatever you want it to be or you think it should be. And, you know, that's very loaded, because often people want or desire something not based on themselves, but based on other people's expectations of themselves, which is a really slippery slope. You know, if you think about, well, young people these days and celebrity, for instance, and some of the programs on television, it's like, really, is that how you want to behave? Is fame so important? And why? You know, why can't you be content with nobody knowing who you are and going for a walk in the woods?
Yeah. Again, I think it's because we lead our lives constantly on camera, and the smartphone has changed that completely. Where we want to be the story all the time, and sometimes it's exactly what you've just said. It's just being on your own, or being on yourself, being with yourself, and being comfortable with that. But I don't know. I think there are young people that are not so comfortable with that, and I think we're going through this kind of, you know, we're through this digital age, and I think we're more than halfway through it now. But there's this, in the beginning, we all wanted to be on social media. We all wanted to have that 15 minutes of fame. But now I think people are exhausted. People are rethinking what privacy means. We're also seeing the downsides of social media. And, you know, social media always started out as a business tool. You know, it was to market your business. It was to be able to raise the profile of your brand or your personal brand. It was for working professionals. And now I think now it's for everyone. It's for anyone. And there were age limits to who could go on to social media, but that also seems to be out the window. So I don't know. I think people are rethinking how much they want to be on social media as well. And you find people saying that they're sort of going offline, or they're unplugging, or they're going off grid, or whatever they want to call it, and they want time out. So I think we're in that kind of phase until we balance out again.
And there's a connection back to openness here, because I remember for instance, Twitter was when I first signed up to Twitter, people were saying things like, you know, I'm having some peanut butter on toast at the moment. And, you know, okay, I'm not particularly interested in somebody who's sharing that, but it strikes me that is very open. You know, you can't take that away from them. And then it kind of moved on to having to be, and Instagram is probably the best example of this, where, you know, people are just wanting to show themselves in the best possible light, which might not be open at all. It might be completely fabricated and nowhere near representative of the truth. And so there seems to be a bit of a switch there from being really open to being really pretend.
I mean, we've seen all those stories from Instagram where people have said to have that one shot, it was so exhausting and nothing was real about it. You know, that they were, you know, they had taken hours to get that one shot, which looked perfect, picture perfect. but I think there's just so much effort that goes into things. If it's effortless, I think then it's more authentic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember when Twitter first started and people would say, oh, we don't want to be on Twitter. Why do I want to know what people have had for breakfast? But then it shifted to becoming, and it still is, it went through that very downtime of the Trump period, you know, where all kinds of stuff was on Twitter. But Twitter is still a place where news is broken, where headlines are made, and where the media also go to look for news, to see what's happening. So I still think it has its place. It's just, it always comes down to us. How do we use things? How are we, what's our engagement? What's our relationship? And we're not great at having positive relationships with things. I mean, we look at the planet. We're not good at keeping our relationship with the planet. We overexhaust, not just ourselves, but the resources. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I do have hope. There is lots of hope, but I think we're not very good sometimes at keeping boundaries. We overexhaust, and I think social media is an example of that.
And this conversation is making me think about a slightly different perspective on openness, because so far we've talked a lot about openness from ourselves, right? So it's like, I'm being open with you, you're being open with me. But then there's the other perspective of openness where it's how you treat what's coming in. So rather than be judgmental of what you observe or what you hear or what you see, it's to be more open about that rather than feel that you have to take a view on it. So what's an example I can think of here, or maybe you can?
The news is a good one. You know,
Okay.
What is news? Is that actually a credible source? Or is that just a soundbite? Is that fake news? I think that's one that we all kind of have to deal with we all have to be discerning about what we're reading and what we choose to read.
Yeah. So there's something about openness combined with qualification, if you like, isn't there? That it's kind of,
Credibility.
yeah. And then you mentioned the news. I've got a bit of a downer on some of the news channels at the moment, because I was watching the BBC News last week, and there was a piece on there which wasn't news. You know, it was a story about something. It doesn't matter what it was. And you could argue that it was promotion, actually. Maybe it wasn't intended to be like that. But I just remember thinking, you know, they've spent several minutes on this piece and it is not news. And I thought that that's what they were there for, was to share the news. Oh, and then over the weekend, as you will know, there was the FA Cup final, right?
Yeah.
So since I was a young boy, I supported Manchester United, so it wasn't a happy weekend. But again, actually, this was on the news as well. They interviewed one of the Manchester City players about his perspective of how they'd done and all this sort of thing. And well, where's the balance there? You know?
No, yeah. And I think sometimes the media forget their own role. And the ethics of journalism. And I often see that, you know, in news pieces I read or things I watch, that some of the credible news sources like the BBC, the Guardian, the Times, etc., sometimes they forget their own journalistic codes of practice, codes of ethic. And I think that's because, like everyone, they're sucked into this kind of frenzy of creating news that they don't actually look at what they've put out. They're not being considerate of their own journalism. So and they're just making news. they're churning out news. So I think that too is a lot to be said for what, you've just explained, the example you cited from the BBC.
Mm. And what about, another part of openness is that perhaps sometimes people are too open. When somebody's got a strong point of view, on the one hand, it's kind of good that people feel comfortable to share their feelings and their thoughts, but sometimes that's without any credibility.
Mm.
And so how do you deal with that? Because I suppose we're touching on free speech now, aren't we?
Free speech, also what's acceptable in a public setting.
Yeah.
So I think it comes, for me, I always think, if you're a dinner party guest, if you see yourself on social media, if you're always on social media, you need to think of yourself as a dinner party guest. You want to be invited back to the same party and be back at that same table. So, you would engage with others, not always talk about yourself. You want to listen. And then I think free speech, I believe we all have the right to free speech, but I think we also sometimes need to take a step back. On social media, we're very happy to jump in to other people's conversations that, you're not even part of, but you want to be part, you want to give your opinion. I always think of the Queen, the late Queen. She would always, I think the way she upheld herself, and she never put a foot wrong. She never made any kind of political blunder, or, she just knew how to keep that balance, make her point, and she would make it very well. And I think there's a lot to be said from that sort of, maybe that old school. I don't know whether you'd call it old school, but I just think it's having a sense of your own being. Also, sometimes, is it worth saying that? Is it going to change anything? Or are you just, is it because you want that opportunity to just say your piece?
I think this is a fascinating area, because I'm beginning to think about, are people taught about this stuff? So if you imagine teenagers or even younger, what sort of guidance are they given around this area, rather than maybe saying to people, everybody has an opinion, you are good enough. If you have an opinion, you share it, and then here are the vehicles for you to do that. But actually no guidance around, but at the same time, consider the impact on other people of you doing that. Be respectful of other people's opinions in return, and consider them, all that goes around it, so that you've got a far more kind of rounded view of how to present yourself, I guess it is.
Wouldn't you also call, I think these are family values. These are values. And I always, growing up, my mum would always remind me, think about how the other person would feel, or what's the consequences of that action. And we have a 16-year-old, and sometimes I'll say to him, he might just say something, and I'll just say, well, have you thought about how that makes that person feel? Or why would you say it that way? And then he might say, oh, and I think that's, I think that's the role of parents or guardians or whoever you're living with, is we keep each other in check. I mean, he will also say to me, he opens my mind to things, and he'll say, well, isn't that biased, or isn't that? And I'll say, oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. But I do think a lot of that is the family values.
And you used the term old school, and now you've touched on family values. And again, this is a memory. So 4 years ago, I had a big birthday. So we had a family gathering, and my sister's daughter's partner. So we had dinner.
Your niece's
He said,
partner.
pardon?
Your niece's partner.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
He said to me, Alan, this is the longest I've sat at a table since I can't remember.
Mm.
And
Where does he eat?
in many families, the traditional family meal around a table, which used to happen very frequently, you know, if not daily, from my understanding, in many households, it doesn't happen like that. So, you know, you might have the teenagers who go and take their dinner to their room. And so I wonder whether that's part of this weakening of the family fabric, if you like.
Oh, I mean, that's one of the things that we have as a family. That's one of our family values, is that we always have dinner together.
Okay.
Of course, if somebody's coming home really late, then that's different. But every day we'll have dinner together, and it's our time to share what we're thinking or what's happening, or just make conversation around the table. And you're not allowed to have your phone at the table.
Yeah.
And we've done that. I mean, we just got the one. We've just got Rory, who's now 16. But from the moment he was born, even when he was a toddler, you know, his high chair would be at the table.
Mm.
He understood what it meant to eat together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important. Otherwise, you have the breakdown of the family. You're all doing your own thing. As it is, you lead very busy lives.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think mealtime, and you know, I think of my family who always had dinner together. That was, you know, and I think there's certain values that you bring, don't you, from your past. So they're passed down from generation to generation to generation. And I'd like to think when Rory gets older and when he has his own family, that would be one family value that he takes.
Mm. And again, tying it back into openness, you remember we talked earlier about how you can create an environment that is conducive to openness. I think this is an example, actually, because if you're accustomed to having that meal every evening with people that are close to you, then it's going to encourage a conversation that is open because you're comfortable in that situation. Whereas if that doesn't happen, and like you were saying, you know, people lead their own lives, it could be very easy to become very kind of closed because you're just on your own all the time. So then it's a bit of a shock to the system when you are in a more public environment. And of course, it's quite normal to expect that you wouldn't be as open as you otherwise might be because you don't quite know how to behave.
I agree. Also, there's one thing that is about behavior.
Mhm.
And I think it's when we are about to have dinner together, if anyone's had an argument or an upset with anyone, it's not to bring that to the table because then you're sitting under an atmosphere.
Yeah.
So you break bread together happily.
Mm.
Sorry, Alan, with all the disturbance, someone's just had a parcel. Can you hear all that noise? Does that disturb you?
No.
Is so that you break bread together happily. And I think there's a lot to be said to that, for that. Even when, you know, they around the table for, you know, business leaders, it's about breaking bread together. It's about, and again, I go back to the Queen. You know, she was known for having those big head of state dinners where everyone would be together. And I think that when you drill that down, it's about values, it's about conversation. And sometimes the best business conversations are around the table, around the dinner table.
Yeah. And I think that does come back to openness. And I think there's something else that's important that comes through here for me is that those sort of environments, whether it be the family dinner table or whether it be the head of state event, it's about creating an environment where you're able to connect at a heart level or at a person level rather than a functional role level. So, instead of it being you as a finance director talking to somebody as the marketing director, it's you as people with families talking together about something. And actually, that's one of the functions of the ValuesJam card game, is that we think that it's going to be really helpful for organizations to establish this sense of personal knowledge, if you like, of each other, of colleagues, especially in an environment where we're less together than we used to be. And I've had people say, there was a guy called Peter in Poland who had a ValuesJam with Gail in Melbourne, Australia. They had never spoken to each other previously. They had a ValuesJam, and they both independently sent a message to me saying, I can't believe how much I think I know the guy. It's like just after a 1 hour conversation. And actually, we're experiencing it here. We don't know each other that well, really, although we've been in touch for many years. I've got a much better sense of you now, having this conversation than previously. Now, on the ValuesJam card decks, there is a question which invites us to open our own question. So why don't you give this a go? Ask your own question about openness, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
How open, Alan, are you with others?
Okay. So what's this, a scale of 1 to 10 or?
Yes, scale of 1 to 10.
Okay. It's not the same for everybody, actually. So I tend, and I've become more confident to trust my intuition. And so some people, I just get a vibe that it's really fine to be just as open as you like. Then other people, I get a feeling that I need to be a little bit more guarded and to suss people out, partly because, so let me give you an example. I've got a pretty dark sense of humor, and I know that sometimes that can be offensive to people. And so I would never dream of cracking a joke that might offend somebody who I don't know. So in that situation, I guess I would be less open. On another occasion, somebody might kind of give an indication that they have a similar sense of humor, and in that case, I'm all in.
Yeah.
So that's not a very.
So it's about knowing your audience, would you say?
Yeah, but not in a very designed way, so I don't have this like formula of how open am I going to be or not. It's more about a feel.
So this kind of leads me on to this. Are you open, it sounds like you are, to working with your own instincts?
Yeah.
Because some people don't like to admit that they work with their instincts.
Yeah, I am, and increasingly so. There are just too many times that my instinct has proven to be right when I kind of rationalize my way around it to a different. So as an example, we were hiring for an organization that I'm associated with, and it was a leader for the business, and we were down to the last two. And it was myself and one of the other representatives that were responsible for making the choice. And one guy was really kind of had a fantastic track record, was on paper a perfect fit. The other person was a bit older, more experienced, less flamboyant and ambitious, but I felt a safe pair of hands. And my feeling taught me this is the person. As an organization, we decided to go with the ambitious person. and it went not very well at all. And I did speak up, maybe not as strongly as I should at the time. And the reason why was because I couldn't explain why I felt like I did. And I didn't feel that my explanation would be strong enough actually for them to go with it, because it was just, I've got this feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think openness, being open, means you're in touch more with your instincts?
That's a great question, because up until you asked that, I think of open more as being who you want to be without a filter. Whereas what we're talking about here is that sometimes I feel that there needs to be a bit of a filter for the other person's benefit as much as my own.
But not with your instincts then? Then how would you be in touch with your instincts if you're not open with yourself?
Yeah, so if you look at it, open with yourself and then open with others, I guess I now err to openness with self before anything else.
Because when I would also say that because you're open with yourself and you're in touch, with how your intuition's working, it then helps you filter who you can be open with and who you can trust. Yeah. I think it's more who you can trust and who maybe you won't go that far with.
Mm. What about you?
My instincts?
No, how open are you?
How open am I? I'd like to say I'm open with, a bit like you, I would know that maybe that joke won't really land so well if I did that, or they might not really understand where I'm coming from. I think that's being discerning. You just know where the boundaries are maybe. But I'm open with everyone. So I'm open with all my people I work with, my clients, the business relationships. I don't have a different persona for different people.
Yeah.
And my social media, and that's the other thing. So some people will have different accounts for their business. I'm just one person, because I believe if I'm hiding, to me, if I'm trying to say I'm this for serendipity and I'm this in Sangeeta's other world, then you're trying to juggle two different things. So I'm speaking in one voice on platform, and I represent my brand and my personal brand. They're just one of the same.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area for me at the moment, because I've been considering this quite a lot over the past few months, so I'm involved in a number of different things. So for instance, ValuesJam is on social media. I mentioned the Global Poetry Showcase earlier. That's on social media. My company, Service Brand Global, is on social media. I run the Global Values Alliance. That's on social media. And the reason why I've done it, I think, is because I'm concerned that people would be really confused if everything was coming just from, say, me, and it was about all these different things that maybe people wouldn't be able to join up the dots for. And so up until now, I've chosen to take the view, if people are interested in ValuesJam, then they would go and listen to, they would go here. If they're interested in poetry, they might go here. And if people are curious enough to connect the dots, then that's absolutely fine. So it's not like hiding, but it's neither taking that view of one is good and will be able to service all of them.
I think one can, because we're all made up of different dimensions. So I'm not just going to be all about corporate social responsibility. There are other things that make up who I am and my brand. So I also think people who maybe love the Values Jam would also want to know, oh, you're doing poetry. I quite like that. Or, wow, you're doing all these different things. I want to be part of everything. And also, we're living in this world, whether we like it or not, it's a numbers game where data is driving everything. So what you're actually doing is splitting what we call
cannibalizing.
Well, no, you're splitting your social capital.
Right.
So your social capital is all your followers on your different accounts on Twitter, for example. So just say, for argument's sake, you've got 100 on each account. If you combined it, you'd have 700 people in one sort of 700 followers just there, you know, as that. And when we are looking now, when we are thinking of the media, or we're thinking, you know, traditional media, radio, TV, print, or we're speaking at events, they all want to see, what is Alan bringing to the table? How many followers is he bringing? So you know, anyone saying, well, I've got 100 here and 100 there and 100 on these different, you've just broken down your social capital, your power, so to speak. When it's combined, you know, you say, I've got 700 on Twitter and 700 on LinkedIn, and it makes your social capital greater. And people, I also think people, we're sophisticated. So we know that there might be different things you're involved in. And because we follow you and like what you're doing, we'll be vested to trust the other projects you're involved in.
That's a great view, and I am open enough to consider it. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be. I knew somebody who had so many different accounts. One is it's time exhausting to try and keep them going and engaged. Also, you'll see some followers will naturally start to follow. And so what are they doing over there? They might as well just be in one sort of ecosystem with you. And, you know, the way you can pick, you know, with your social media handle, you can encapsulate everything you're doing. And there's different ways to do it. You can do it through Linktree, or you can just sort of say, I'm involved with poetry, ValuesJam, whatever it is, and put those links in. And then people can find out more. I think, again, it's just about this thing of, you want your openness to work for you, to be simple. Anything that's simple and easy is a big win.
I vote for that. That's for sure.
So I think there's a lot in the way we approach our social media. So when it comes back to the question of how open I am, I'm on my Instagram. You can follow me, and what you'll see is not just about my work, but also about my life, what I've done at the weekend, or where I've been for a walk, you know, all the things I'm doing. Because invariably what I'm doing is part of my interest, and it's also connected to my brand in some way.
That's very thought-provoking, actually, Sangeeta. So what I'm going to do is bring the Values Jam to a close with one final question, which is this: what are you encouraged to do differently about openness as a result of our conversation?
Differently? I think I picked a card, or the card that came for me was just a natural one for me. I don't think there's anything I could do differently, because I feel I'm doing it already. But I think I would like to find out more about other people within my network. So you and I have spent time together. We've known each other for a long time, but this is the first time we've had an open conversation.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think I did something recently on Friday. Again, somebody I've known for a very long time, incredible artist, but I only sat down with them on Friday to really understand everything they've done. and learn from them. So that would be, is to spend more time with people.
Okay. And just to try and make that a little bit more tangible and concrete, what's the first step you could take towards doing what you've just described?
Inviting people into my space.
So have you got somebody in mind that you're going to start with?
Have I got somebody in mind? Perhaps there's somebody I haven't caught up with for a very long time.
Okay.
And as we were talking today, a lot of their work has influenced how I think and how my approach to business.
Okay.
And I'm going to reconnect with him and ask him how he is. Because he calls himself an open networker.
Okay.
His thing is he's open, random, and supportive. So I haven't seen him for a very long time, online or offline. So that's where I'm going to start.
Fantastic. And mine relates to this question you posed about the single brand or multiple. And as a first step, I'm going to share with people on one handle my other handles. So I'm just going to make people aware, for instance, on ValuesJam, that I'm also involved with the Global Poetry Showcase, and I also run a business. Because why wouldn't you? Yeah, it's like.
Yeah. In fact, have you heard of Linktree?
Yes.
You could you could have that link in your ValuesJam handle.
Okay.
So then people could just see all the different, I don't know if they all have different web links.
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
You could still just put the ones that do.
Okay.
And then your actual Twitter handle could be, all the things you're involved with.
Yeah.
And maybe include those in those handles in that handle.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So there we are. You're a qualified values jammer, Sangeeta, now.
And I wanted to ask, how do you get hold of the ValuesJam pack?
There's a website. So I'll send you the link after our call, if you like.
Yeah, no, please do. Are they on Amazon or anywhere?
They're not on Amazon. So you order them. We've got distribution here in the UK, in the US, in Australia. If you know anybody in India that wants to become a distributor, we'd love to know about it. And the Far East is the other area where we'd like a distributor. So yeah, and then they're just mailed out when people order them.
No, I love them. I think they're just very clever. Very clever cards.
All right, you take care.
You too. Thanks.